In my books and earlier videos, I mentioned that, thanks to the mirrors in time, both Barack Obama and Donald Trump have collectively reprised the role of Christ, each playing literal antichrists or mirrored opposites of Jesus. The different functions performed by the collective Christ were divided, with some given to Obama, like the job of faux healer, as with Obamacare, while others were given to Trump, enduring trials, betrayals, crucifixion, having his crown usurped, etc. Just remember that they portray mirror opposites of Christ, which makes them antichrists. The situation is very similar to that of Moses and Elijah, who Christ himself most directly mirrored, with their collective roles coalescing and being assigned to the singular Christ at the Transfiguration. This is how the mirror controls the mirrored aspects of events in time. 1 into 2, and then 2 into 1. Back and forth it goes, on and on throughout time. The same narrative plays and replays over and over again. It's also why I tell you that the Bible is a science textbook explaining our reality. Sound crazy? Look at all the overt iconography that portrayed Barack Obama as a Christ in paintings and news articles, with halos on his head, or all manner of visual brainwashing to make one think Obama was actually Christ. Trump, on the other hand, played the version of Christ that was at odds with the ruling Jewish elite of the day. This time, however, Trump, as a mirror opposite, vociferously defends the Jews, even though false stories of an imaginary rift between him and Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu have appeared. He must be seen to turn the tables on the Jews, to betray them, when in reality it is Trump who is turning the tables on his cadre of supporters. He will also be the one to primarily lead his flock to a crucifixion and a resurrection, just not the resurrection you envision. As I have repeatedly tried to explain in my books and videos, the years from 1989 throughout perhaps 2027, although I doubt we last that long, represent the contemporary crucifixion of Christ. What once took, at most, a couple of days, when you include riding in on the palm branches, having the Last Supper, being betrayed, being tried in court, the journey to the cross, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension, the mikvah purification, now is taking 30-plus years. The sequence of events here is playing in reverse, with the massive elongation of events perhaps being the result of the thinning or exhaustion of time. We have seen Trump's trial in court. We are waiting for the betrayal, likely by Trump at the behest of the Jews, after which the world will be plunged into darkness and famine, when we enjoy our Last Supper. It can be said that we've already experienced the palm branches leading to the crossing, with the path of those 2 solar eclipses, especially the last one that retraced the path to Egypt along the Great Lakes, as they visually represent a palm tree with branches. Why Egypt? Because it represents leading the Christians into slavery, just as Moses led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. A mirror reflection. As I mentioned earlier, this recalls the time when the God of the Old Testament allegedly stopped the sun and moon in the sky and allowed the Israelites to finish their bloodletting, as detailed in Joshua 10:13. This crucifixion, playing in reverse, is detailed in my last book, and will be the subject of a future video. As mentioned earlier, I reveal an image of how I see time in my mind in my last 4 books. It's like a path through the forest, with hills and valleys and twists and turns. In particular, starting after 9/11, we began a slow right turn, a turn that would eventually cross back over itself at 2009 in 2020. During that point, the effects of time essentially were lessened even more. Those years from the crossing point in 2009 were defined by the presidencies of Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Obama had 2 parts, or 8 years, while Trump endured the 3rd part. This precisely mimics the nearly 5,800 years between Eden and now, and the point at which Christ entered the story some 2,000 years ago, when mankind entered the 3rd part of this cell of time. It also mimics the course of Flight 77, making a loop before allegedly striking the Pentagon on 9/11. In our contemporary loop, the point at which Christ's crucifixion began, going backward in time, was 2024 through 2017, the years of the twin solar eclipses over the United States. This was especially the case in 2017, the first year of Trump's first term, when a great deal of crucifixion symbolism was replayed during and after the Great Eclipse. See my books if you are interested in learning more. And then, 4 years after his first term, we have Trump being given his crown a second time to reflect the state of affairs prior to his crucifixion. Unfortunately, this resurrection of kingship produced a mirrored Trump. In other words, if the 2016 Trump was good for the people, the 2024 Trump would be bad for the people. This is how the mirrors in time work. Roles must reverse, but the story plays the same. The research that I performed for my last 3 books first led me to recognize that the years 1912 through 1945 seem to undeniably be replaying in our contemporary life. Indeed, those furtive thoughts arose in a book I released in mid-2017, Veil of Evil, in which I predicted that a pandemic would occur, and I even stated that it would begin around 2020. I made this connection to 2020 based on the image of time that I had seen in my mind. In any event, this eventually led me to what I called the Proud Tower event, the assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, which was the spark for World War I. But as I kept digging and locating more mirrored events in time, in an effort to trace them back to their inscrutable source, it inevitably led me to the crucial year of 1888, as being the point at which time itself appeared to have been hijacked. I ultimately made the unbelievable assertion that this seemed to have been directly tied to when the Egyptian obelisk-styled Washington Monument went online. I stated that the obelisk, itself a simple sundial or a simple clock, and therefore a reporter of time, was actually somehow functioning in a manner similar to the needle in my laser and needle experiments that I had conducted years earlier, which caused light to become divided, essentially forming a cut-off branch, like water flowing around a rock. Light became divided, with the area between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. being displayed vertically, while the light between 2 and 10 was displayed horizontally. In fact, that latter light even looked like woven fabric. Essentially, I created a rip in the cloak of light with a needle, something typically used to mend holes in fabric. When the light finally came back together, The ripples created by the split would both enhance and cancel out other ripples, thus creating an interference pattern that seemed to force light to stand at attention or to act in a certain manner, like dutiful soldiers ready to fight. Believe it or not, there is evidence of this very effect that has been deliberately encoded in the streets of Washington, D.C. And this was done from the very outset of its design, with the alternating narrow and wide streets. There is no logical point to include narrow and wide streets, not even for aesthetic reasons. This was done purely for the purpose of symbolism. Let me stress that Pierre-Charles L'Enfant's design for D.C. was a full decade before Thomas Young discovered the wave properties of light. So how did the Freemasons know this? In any event, I therefore reckoned that time operated the same way as light and sound. I hypothesized that a cut-off branch of time was formed at the point at which the Washington Monument went online. As proof, I revealed some very strange temporal anomalies that took place at that time. One anomaly in particular that took place precisely 4 weeks after the Washington Monument went online was the 1888 presidential election. That contest was between the incumbent, Democrat Grover Cleveland, and Republican Benjamin Harrison. The latter ended up winning the Electoral College, and hence the presidency, while the former won the popular vote. This event would lead to the unprecedented occurrence of Grover Cleveland winning back the presidency in 1892, granting him 2 non-consecutive terms. This had never occurred before, and it would never occur again until 2024. I claimed that this entire sequence of events was somehow tied back to, once again, events in 1888, whereby 3 Kaisers ruled the German Empire in but a single year. Wilhelm I died on 9 March and was succeeded by his son, Frederick III, but the latter only lived for 99 days, dying of cancer of the larynx. Frederick was succeeded by Wilhelm II. So you see, the very same thing happened over a span of 99 days, with a Wilhelm ruling as bookends to an abbreviated ruler in between. Consider all of the incredible mirror events that took place around Grover Cleveland's 2 non-consecutive presidential terms. For example, in the 4 years preceding his first term, James Garfield would be shot by an assassin and die in September of his first year in office. His term would be completed by his vice president, Chester A. Arthur. Likewise, in the 4 years following Cleveland's second term, the very next president, William McKinley, would be shot and killed in the 1st September of the latter's second term. These are patently obvious mirror echoes, with the same event being reflected both forward and backward in time, from a central point at the beginning or during the term of the 23rd president, Benjamin Harrison. Most importantly, this central point occurred at roughly the 1/3, 2/3 crossing point, as represented by the analemma and the law of birthright, which was discussed in earlier videos, and as I will somewhat reiterate in a few moments. In my earlier books, I hypothesized that the placement of the Washington Monument at that particular point in time, 9 October 1888, essentially served as a needle jabbed into the arm of time, just like my experiment drove a needle into light, to allow time to become vaccinated, so to speak, by the introduction of a set of lethal viral narratives. Narratives specifically designed to nullify or eradicate the cancerous presence of Christ in time. And yes, my fellow souls, the symbolic linkage of the obelisk with a needle and the COVID scamdemic with the associated vaccine should not be denied. Sound crazy? Well, think of a tree having the branch of another tree grafted upon it, like a toxic machineal or beech apple grafted upon a regular apple tree. Good would forcibly become evil. Before we continue, I need to briefly explain a very important biblical concept known as the law of birthright. Essentially, it entitled the firstborn male to 2/3 of the father's assets, also referred to as the 2 parts. Any other sons or daughters were forced to divide amongst themselves the remaining 3rd part. What the law of birthright taught was the basic division between male and female, with the former associated with the 2 parts, confirmed with the Father and Son being the masculine 2 parts of the Christian Trinity, while the latter, the feminine, is linked to the 3rd part, the enigmatic Holy Ghost hiding behind her veil. When reduced to numbers, this is 0.66 and 0.33 respectively, and even the numbers 5 and 3, as we will soon see. Why is this important? With regards to the Washington Monument, these key numbers come into play. The height of the monument is 555 feet and 5 1/8 inches, with both the base and the pyramidion at the top being 55 feet. Logically, this would seem to enforce the number 5 overtly. However, it also goes out of its way to reveal the number 6. You see, 555 feet 5 1/8 inch is within less than an inch of being 6,666 inches high. Likewise, the pyramidion and the base are 660 inches. So you see, it adeptly represents the 2 parts of the law of birthright. But not just that. The number 5 also refers to the male, as it's the redemptive value of males age 1 month to 5 years in the Bible, 3 being the value for females. This aligns perfectly with the golden ratio, since the numbers 5 and 3 are the smallest whole numbers that most closely represent it. And finally, the Washington Monument resides within the 2 parts of the analemma adeptly placed in the streets of Washington, D.C. by the Freemasons. The analemma perfectly reflects the golden ratio and, to a certain extent, the law of birthright. In any event, everything about the Washington Monument is designed to promote the masculine, even the overt phallic appearance. Keep this in mind as we proceed. What follows was mostly taken from my book, The Masters of the Mirror Return to Eden, which I highly recommend if interested in the full account of this research, with minor updates for clarity. I realize that what I propose will seem impossible, but look around today. Look at all of the crazy shit happening. My research, at the very least, seeks to provide some sort of explanation for what's been happening. Worst case, since the data cannot be disputed, come up with your own explanation. I've done all the work. Just sit back and ruminate on what it means to you. Consider that the Washington Monument went online at the virtual midpoint between the birth of the United States and the events of 11 September 2001. From 4 July 1776 to the point that the Washington Monument was officially opened on 9 October 1888 was 204 days. From that point to 11 September 2001 was 41,244 days. That's a difference of 240 days. Those 240 days constitute precisely 0.66, or 2/3 of a year. The very same masculine marker defining the two parts of the law of birthright that has been associated with the phallic Washington Monument mentioned above. If that is true, the monument itself provides a link to both the birth and the death of the United States. As stated, one of those viral narratives inserted into time by the Washington Monument was the 3 German Kaisers mentioned above. Another, much more incredible assertion was that the enigmatic and brutal Jack the Ripper murders, occurring at roughly the same time, were solely created to deliberately introduce yet another element into the viral narrative, an element which, I believe, was insidiously designed to bring about the later events of 9/11, some 113 years later. Heck, it can even be envisioned that the Washington Monument caused the timeline divergence that began around 4 July 1776 and ended around 11 September 2001. This would mean that the entire presence of the United States was manufactured by a rip in time, a temporal tear. While I don't believe that happened, for example, I believe that the timeline began being reconnected around 1960, thus bringing about Kennedy's murder, and was completed in 2020. But this is certainly a possibility. Those canonical 5 Whitechapel murders in London both began and ended with a woman named Mary, just as can be said of Christ, while the 3rd and 4th murders took place on the same morning, thus earning the nickname of the double event. 2 died, brutally struck down in the morning, just like the Twin Towers on 9/11. When I originally wrote that last sentence above, a spark of realization suddenly hit me. That sentence, and the overt display of the numbers 7 and 17 in the events of 1888, which dutifully mimicked the overt 7 and 17 on 9/11, spawned an intriguing theory in my mind. Call it a eureka moment, if you will. Given that we have an undeniable midpoint in the date that the Washington Monument went online that puts it in between the birth of the United States and the events of 9/11, and given that I suspect that the monument functions as a needle creating a rip in time to vaccinate it against Christ, what if the murders ascribed to Jack the Ripper were meant to bring about the later destruction of the World Trade Center complex, with each mutilated woman playing the role of a mutilated building? Think about it. The murdered women were prostitutes, and the World Trade Center complex effectively mimicked a moneyed form of prostitution. What if these murders functioned as seeds that were designed to become magnified in time, just as the needle does to light in my laser experiment, and grow from the death of a woman to the destruction of a building, almost like a spell cast with a voodoo doll or some other satanic ritual? Within months, a man who would be king, Crown Prince Rudolph of Austria-Hungary, was assassinated, likely by his own father, Emperor Franz Joseph, along with the former's mistress, Mary. Yes, another Mary. This event, I hypothesize, rippled both forward and backward in time, and, along with other carefully manufactured events, like the Jack the Ripper murders, began to manifest itself as echoes. The likely assassination of King Ludwig II in the past was mimicked equidistantly in the future by the sinking of SS Utopia, an event itself that was linked to the sinking of Titanic, which, as we've seen in my books, is also a replay of the crucifixion of Christ. Likewise, thanks to the timely hijacking brought about by the Washington Monument that linked those events to the United States, in particular the very first president, the likely assassinations of Rudolph and Mary became mimicked in the assassinations of U.S. Presidents Garfield and McKinley, and eventually caused the Proud Tower event itself, the assassinations of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, also likely at the behest of Emperor Franz Joseph, since Ferdinand was next in line for the throne. This latter event became echoed in the assassinations of Lincoln and Kennedy equidistantly in both the past and the future. While it might sound confusing, essentially, all assassinations of U.S. presidents came about because of the murders of Rudolph and Mary, 113 days after the Washington Monument went online. The timeline was being reprogrammed, and all of history was being changed. The Washington Monument acted as a needle inserting a carefully crafted virus into time itself. Its primary goal was to make the Christian nation of the United States the focal point for the karmic retribution that would be guaranteed to ensue, thanks to the natural operation of the mirror. Given the fact that the Austro-Hungarian Empire would cease to exist after World War I, a nation of two parts, this would logically telegraph the eventual destruction of the United States at a specific point in the future. Indeed, to fulfill that seemingly impossible goal, I believe that its ultimate purpose was to bring about 9/11 itself, hence the insertion of the Jack the Ripper narrative, to rip a hole in time and hijack it. As if to further prove this line of thought, look at the symbolism of Cleveland, surname of the president who served 2 non-consecutive terms in the late 19th century. The word cleave is a perfect representation for the mirror, as it has mirrored meanings of both to split or divide, while at the same time also meaning to cling, adhere, and be faithful. They split the timeline, and then they grafted or caused another to become adhered to it, to become cleaved to it. If we continue with the Jack the Ripper narrative, then those 2 divided terms of Grover Cleveland were like 2 huge breasts of a woman, separated by the cleavage in the middle, something which should have attracted our attention. The environment was busy screaming, "Hey, look here, time has been jacked." Unfortunately, like cleavage on a well-endowed woman, all it did was become a quick distraction, a momentary marvel designed to titillate, yet be quickly forgotten. Located in the middle, between both Cleveland terms, was the administration of Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd president. That made Harrison the midpoint, the dark valley of cleavage with a capital V. If you fast forward to the point when Trump was reelected to non-consecutive terms in 2024, just like Cleveland, Joe Biden was the 46th president. 23 is precisely half of 46. Yet again, the midpoint. And just look at the person that ran against Trump in the 2024 election. Kamala Harris. Harris and Harrison. And what are the odds of 2 non-consecutive terms, each taking place after a period of 23 presidents? Nope, nothing to see here, my fellow souls. Go back to sleep. As mentioned, the Washington Monument went online in the 113th year before 9/11, and the convenient death of Crown Prince Rudolph and his mistress Mary took place 113 days after it went online. The similarity in numbers defining this span of time seems much too coincidental. In fact, we can now see that the deaths of Rudolph and Mary, like the Whitechapel murders, were all part of the collective rewritten narrative that was injected into time itself by the needle of the Washington Monument. Of course, eagle-eyed historians will note that 7 buildings were destroyed on 9/11, but I only discussed the canonical 5 Ripper murders as being the potential source. What about the other 2? First of all, I urge you to read The Masters of the Mirror: Return to Eden. It has an amazing and fully detailed account of all the Jack the Ripper elements. But basically, the 6th murder was an unknown headless torso of a woman discovered on 2 October 1888 in the basement of the Metropolitan Police Headquarters, then under construction in Whitehall. This was 1 week before the Washington Monument went online. Hauntingly, an arm and a shoulder belonging to the body were discovered several weeks earlier floating in the River Thames. Discovered, quite unbelievably, on 11 September, the very day of the attacks in New York 113 years later. As for the 7th and final murder, it turned out to be a 7-year-old boy named John Gill, who represented the final building to fall on 9/11, World Trade Center Building 7. And finally, the last 2 key elements of the rewritten narrative took place within a year of the Washington Monument going online. First, on New Year's Day, 1889, a total solar eclipse would be visible from parts of the United States, a situation that would reoccur in 1918, 2017, and 2024, the latter 2 dates necessary for the very beginning of the crucifixion of the United States. New Year's Day is very symbolic because it refers to a new beginning, a great reset, so to speak. Likewise, about 9 months later, the typical gestation period of a human fetus, a pandemic would hold the world in its icy grip. The Russian flu, also known as the Asiatic flu, which may have been from either influenza or a coronavirus, swept the world, allegedly killing 1 million people. Coincidentally, 1918 was the peak year of the Spanish flu that swept the world, and it also had a total solar eclipse that cut across the United States. Naturally, the 2020 coronavirus scamdemic was right between the 2017 and 2024 twin eclipses over the United States. The eclipse, the pandemic, the year of 3 emperors, the Jack the Ripper murders, the deaths of Crown Prince Rudolph and Mary, all of these events were specifically designed to inject a vaccinated version of history into time itself. A brand new cutoff timeline was introduced, and a new course was set. A deleterious detour down the dark and destructive avenues of the Twilight Zone. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. Anyway, believe it or not. If you found this topic interesting, then please check out my other videos in my books. My website is www.mastersofthemirror.com. Thanks